Good morning. Before we open up, I've asked Mr. Natalie to open up with the prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say something briefly in my language. Holison da Kadigwantan in this it's a night da as you call it this Massinetha. So I wanted to thank the Creator for this blessed day, seeing the season change and hearing the birds once again. It's a wonderful day. We have to practice being grateful for all the things that we experience, especially our family, our friends, and the people that we serve back home, and the many issues that we are challenged with, that the Creator will guide us and give us wisdom. And have a blessed day. Masi.
Thank you, Mr. Natalie. We have one agenda item. It's a public briefing on progress of the post-secondary education renewal at Aurora College with Honorable Carolyn Cochran, Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment. But before we get into actually, can I have somebody that will move the agenda as presented? Move, Mr. Bolio. All in favor? Thank you. Is there any conflict of interest? Seeing none, we will start with Mr. Simpson, my colleague on the right.
Good morning, R.J. Simpson, MLA for Hay.
Good morning, Lou Siebert, MLA Tabacha. I'm strictly here as an observer. Thank you.
You don't have to hit your buttons, Mr. Siebert.
He hasn't been in here often enough. Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Good morning, Michael Natalie, MLA for Detchel.
My name is Tom Boley, MLA for Tuneda Willide.
Good morning, Danny McNeely Satu.
Good morning, I'm separated from my peoples. Julie Green, Yellowknife Center.
Shane Thompson, Nahendeh. On my left is Allison Anderson, our policy analyst. On my right is Jennifer Frankie Smith, our committee clerk, and Cynthia James is our clerk in training. I'll turn the floor over to you, Minister Cochran, and opening comments and introduce.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. We're going to be brief today in order to have as much time as possible for committee's questions. I'm pleased to provide you with an update of the transformation of Aurora College into a polytechnic university. With me today I have Mr. Tom Weegar, the Associate Deputy Minister of Post-Secondary Education Renewal, Ms. Sylvia Hayner, Deputy Minister of Education, Culture and Employment, Mr. Mark Argue, Manager of Policy, Aurora College Transformation, and Ms. Mira Dunn, my Ministerial Special Advisor. I want to begin by acknowledging the significant progress to date that has been achieved through collaboration with committee. It was a year ago this week that I first met with committee to discuss the recommendations of the Aurora College Foundational Review, including the recommendation that we transform Aurora College into a polytechnic university. Since that time, we've completed the government response to the review and hired Dr. Tom Weegar, who has already taken steps to strengthen the college and prepare for its transformation. During the first month of his new position, Dr. Weegar also met with municipal and Indigenous leaders and led public forums in 3 Aurora College campus communities in the 3. The response to these engagements has been overwhelmingly positive. Mr. Chair, we have completed the government response to the Aurora College Foundational Review and drafted the Post-Secondary Educational Act, critical steps in meeting our mandate commitment to expand opportunities for post-secondary education, trades-oriented learning, and northern educational institutions. We remain committed to an open and engaged process to planning and are on track to complete the 2018-2019 post-secondary education milestones that we announced last fall. One piece of ongoing work that I look forward to sharing with committee is the post-secondary education framework that will include the Northwest Territories' vision and goals for post-secondary education. Developing the vision and goals will focus our efforts as we strengthen our post-secondary system. It will also support our work with partner institutions and organizations to ensure that students have increased access to excellent programs. Our vision and goals must be rooted in the aspirations and needs of our people. To this end, I'm pleased to say that 743 surveys from all regions of the territory were submitted during the engagement phase of the vision process. Nearly 200 of those submissions were from residents under the age of 29, a group especially important to the future of our labor market. Mr. Chair, I anticipate that post-secondary education will continue to be a focus in the incoming 19th Legislative Assembly. However, there is very much a decision the new Assembly will make. This is very much a decision the new Assembly will make. As we are all aware, the economic and social benefits from investment in post-secondary education are extensive, and the path we have chosen will give our residents the advantages they need and deserve. Make no mistake, there's still a great deal of work to come, but I'm confident that upon the conclusion of the 18th Legislative Assembly, we have laid the foundation for establishing an effective and sustainable post-secondary education system that amplifies best practices. Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'd like to ask Dr. Weegar to provide an update on the work currently underway. We would then be pleased to hear any comments and questions from committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Mr. Weegar? Dr. Weegar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am pleased to join Minister Cochran here today, and I'm glad to have the chance to provide you with an update on the work that is now underway to strengthen post-secondary education and transform Aurora College into a polytechnic university. We are currently focused on strengthening the college and planning for the transformation. This means ensuring we are on track to meet the commitments in the government response to the findings and recommendations of the Aurora College Foundational Review, and establishing the necessary structure to complete the transformation in an effective and sustainable manner. We remain confident that the transformation of Aurora College into a polytechnic university will allow us to best respond and support the long-term needs of our students, communities, and labor market. We also know the success of the Polytechnic University means building on the existing college and the strengths of its campus communities as we continue to develop and grow the institution. I started my dual roles on March 4th, so this is really my moving into my fourth month. I've been fully engaged as the Associate Deputy Minister responsible for overseeing the transformation process. At the same time, I hold the responsibilities of President of Aurora College and oversee the day-to-day operations. This has allowed me to bridge the support for the transformation across the college and the government. As for my own background, I describe myself as an educational leader. Including my current posting, I have experience at 7 colleges across 3 provinces, 1 territory, and 1 state in Minnesota. During my first month in my role, I met with municipal and Indigenous leaders, as the Minister indicated, and led public forums in the 3 Aurora College campus communities. I also maintain a passion for ongoing engagement with Indigenous communities, and this has been a consistent part of my work over my career and my leadership approach. I was pleased to have a chance to engage with local and Indigenous leadership in the 3 campus communities in my first month in the North. Success in any project, even one as large and complex as the transformation, begins with ensuring we have the right people in place and we are set up to work together effectively. The transformation of Aurora College will draw heavily on expertise both inside the college and within the department. We've been developing an ECE-based transformation team that will support my role as Associate Deputy Minister. Dr. Chris Joseph, former project lead for the review, is part of this team and has been working closely with me to ensure we stay on track to meet the commitments of the government response. Working groups led by the college staff will be established to help design and implement steps in the transformation. The college leadership team has already been engaged with ECE around the transformation, and we have a retreat planned this week to advance the foundational planning. Moving forward, we are establishing a working group structure that will bring together staff from the college along with ECE to plan, coordinate, and implement the changes. It really is essential that the college and ECE kind of come together and integrate and move this initiative along. As I noted earlier, changes are both to strengthen the college and to prepare it for its transformation to a 4-year polytechnic university. This work can only be successful when it's done collaboratively across the college and the government. So I'd like to talk a little bit about a few key pieces, including the post-secondary education vision, the strat plan coming up for the college, and how we plan to implement that plan. The Northwest Territories Post-Secondary Education Framework will help to guide how the GNWT manages and invests in post-secondary education. The Aurora College Foundational Review highlighted the urgent need to establish a vision for post-secondary education that will allow the government to guide how the GNWT manages and invests in post-secondary education across the territory, and guide the development of a new vision, mission, and goals for Aurora College as it undergoes a transformation. We are preparing a brief public update on the vision exercise in the coming days, but I'm pleased to share some of that information with you today. As you're aware, the public and Indigenous governments have recently been engaged in the development of a vision for post-secondary education in the NWT through a survey. In addition to broad advertising, a speaker series on post-secondary education was coordinated to promote the engagement phase of the framework development. The speaker series also enabled the opportunity for broad discussion around the future of our post-secondary education system. 9 speaking events were held in campus communities, and all were well attended and received significant media attention and coverage. Speaker series hosts included the Shinta Centre for Research and Learning, the University of Alberta North, Hotosida, Northwest Territories Chamber of Commerce, College Nordique Francophone, and Aurora College. As the Minister indicated, we received 743 submissions, a really good indication that residents remain interested in the work that the government is undertaking around post-secondary. Steps were taken to ensure participation by all residents throughout the regions of the NWT. As expected, the number of submissions was highest in regions where the population is greatest and where there are existing Aurora College campuses, namely North Slave, South Slave, and the Beaufort Delta regions. Steps were also taken to ensure participation by residents in a variety of age groups, and there was a particular attention paid to those under the age of 29, given the importance of this age group to the future labour market in NWT. The response rate of those under 29-year-olds is encouraging and is anticipated to greatly benefit the development of the vision and goals that will guide the post-secondary education sector moving forward. By engaging directly with Indigenous government, steps were taken to ensure participation by Indigenous residents. Approximately 30% of those submitting a survey self-identified as Indigenous. The survey collected qualitative data with survey participants writing responses to questions rather than ticking boxes. This type of data takes a little longer to analyze because we have to read every answer, of course, to every question, and then analyze the data and put it into thematic groups. And this process continues this week. The survey data will be the foundation of the vision and post-secondary education objectives. As for the next steps, the government will engage members of the Legislative Assembly to gain their input on a draft NWT post-secondary education framework. It's anticipated that a finalized framework will be released during the August sitting of the Legislative Assembly. Following release of the Northwest Territories Post-Secondary Education Framework, the government will work with post-secondary education stakeholders to implement the vision and goals through an ongoing process of engagement. So this brings me to the strat plan for Aurora College. I often describe the visioning process that we've gone through as kind of a high-level 30,000-foot overview of post-secondary in the territory. The strategic plan that Aurora College will embark on in the fall is more the 5,000-foot level. It's more the getting into the details of what the college should look like as it transforms into a new polytechnic university. What kind of animal do we want to look like and be, sort of thing. So this fall we'll begin the development of our strat plan. The NWT framework for post-secondary education will provide a vision and goals for the post-secondary education system as a whole. The Aurora College Strat Plan will establish a new vision and goals particular to the institution and will help guide planning and decision-making in the coming years. Strategic planning for the college will involve a great deal of additional engagement with staff, students, government, communities, Indigenous governments, and other key stakeholders, such as the Chamber of Commerce and the Chamber of Mines sort of thing. So we're excited to get going in the strat plan. It's happening for us starting in October. Together with the government response, the strat plan will inform the development of an implementation plan for the transformation. The implementation plan will provide additional milestones and timelines for the transformation. The implementation plan will also include mechanisms to monitor and evaluate the progress of the transformation. We will be bringing this to committee for their review following the completion of the strategic plan early in 2020. However, I anticipate many more incremental updates like today's meeting to ensure members have clear and up-to-date information of the work being done around the transformation. I'd like to talk a little bit about our Academic Advisory Council, which is starting to come together. The establishment of an Academic Advisory Council to support us is one of the early steps in the transformation. The council will support, guide, mentor, and coach us along the way. The council will involve post-secondary institutions from across Canada and include membership of institutions that have undergone or are undergoing transformative processes. So colleges such as Sask Poly are a good example that have made transformation similar to what we're making. They've done so about 4 years ago, where they moved from a SciAS to a 4-year Sask Polytechnic. The council is a specialized group that will serve only in an advisory capacity for the duration of the transformation. It is essential to the successful transformation that we build lasting relationships with institutions across Canada and that we learn from their successes and potentially their mistakes as we move forward. We expect to have the terms of reference completed in the next month for this advisory council, and we'll start recruiting member institutions shortly afterward. Our aim is to hold the first meeting in August. I want to conclude by talking a little bit about the program review framework that is coming up. Progress is being made on the development of a new program review framework that meets national standards, best practices, and supports the establishment of the Polytechnic University. The review process has begun and first involves developing a new program review process and the implementation of new policies and guiding documents. However, it's not just about the program review process. It's also about clear and transparent processes around program decisions more broadly. You know, what are the decisions that cause us to initiate a program? What are the decisions and the criteria that cause us to think about closing down and shutting down a program? Completing reviews of the social work diploma and Bachelor of Education programs under this new framework is a priority. We value the input already received around the social work diploma review, and we'll be using that information as we apply the new review process. As we move to a 4-year Polytechnic University, getting all of our programs reviewed properly and following a clear and transparent process is really critical to our long-term success. We need to do it right, and we need to do it in the right order. Mr. Chair, that concludes my comments about the update around the transformation to a polytechnic. I'm very excited to be working with NWT around this transformation. We're on an exciting journey. You know, we're creating a new university. We're creating a university that will reflect Northern values, and hopefully that will have a high reflection of Indigenous perspectives and values. And that hasn't been done before in Canada. So this is very exciting, I think, and I think NWT is very much taking a leadership role. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Weegar. Questions, Mr. Simpson?
Yeah, if we're getting right into questions, I do have some questions. All right. Thank you for the presentation. I understand this presentation was focused more on the process than perhaps the outcomes of what the college would look like. But there was a lot of talk about post-secondary, about a 4-year Polytechnic University. But part of the reason that this foundational review was called for in the first place is because I saw the community learning centers being underutilized, and I see a segment of our population who didn't receive the education they should have in the K-12 system and could be receiving that education or the skills they need through the network of 22 community learning centers. I mean, there's probably more. There's Aurora colleges in more place in the territory than anything else, and the speaker series was mentioned, and I'm not sure what his position is, but he oversees the community learning centers in the South Slave. Ken Latour, in his speech, he talked about community learning centers as a fourth campus. I know the minister always talks about 3 strong campuses, and he said maybe we should start looking at the community learning centers as a fourth campus, because I find that it's getting lost in the fray, and I think that might have been his point with that as well. So what does the minister or the witnesses think about that terminology, and when they start using that fourth campus terminology so this doesn't get forgotten about? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Minister Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for pointing that out. I do try to always correct myself. I usually try to say 3 strong campuses, 22 strong community learning centers. I'll try to make note of that. I'm not 100% sure of calling 22 community learning centers the fourth campus. I'd have to give that some consideration, although I can say that we do need to strengthen them as well. We recognize they're out there. We are trying to get a handle on, because they do great work, but they're not all on doing the same work, so we need to figure that out. And we need to, as we move forward with our developing the Polytech University, figure out how we can use them more. We have computers now that are providing things, so do we need to focus everything on campuses, or can we do programs reaching out to the communities versus using our community learning centers? Those are questions that we're in the process of asking. We haven't come up with all the answers yet, but we are looking at the possibility of using technology to reach students where they are in their homes. So that'll be something that'll come up probably in the next assembly. Is that fair? So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's right. They're not, the community learning centers aren't all doing the same work, and that's part of the beauty of them, is that they can focus on what's needed in each region. But I just want to put this out there that going forward, there needs to be serious consideration to how the management structure of those community learning centers is. I don't want them to. There was a lot of talk about working with ECE to develop this plan, and from a lot of the things I've heard, there was maybe too much interference from ECE in terms of the operation of the college. So I want to make sure that these community learning centers have the freedom to do what they need to do. They're not held back by the college or by the department, but they're supported, and they're able to do work needed in their regions, and they're given that autonomy, but they're given the opportunity to collaborate as well. So more of just a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Does the minister wish to comment on the comment?
No, I'll take it.
Okay. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Cherry. I'm a strong supporter of this initiative, and the minister knows that. It's probably the most exciting thing that's happened in the 18th Assembly, in my view. So I have a couple of questions I want to ask. This is probably the last couple of days that all the MLAs are going to be together until August. And we're going to scatter very shortly. We've got a huge legislative agenda before us, and I'm just a bit concerned about how regular MLAs are going to be involved in the development of this framework. So I want to encourage the minister and Mr. Weegar, if there's some way in which you can engage us early and often in the development of that framework. I'm very keen to see what's in there. Being a product of a post-secondary institution myself, I think I've got some interesting insights and ideas to offer, but I just want to find out how you're going to get us engaged and involved in this, because we're not going to be together again until August. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's actually, I appreciate that you brought that question back, because I had written it down on my list of questions. So I'm going to put it back, and if that's all right, Mr. Chair, to the committee, because we are just at the end of it now. We're just finalizing the draft. It should be done within the next few weeks, month max. And so I'm going to, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but I'm going to put it back on the committee and ask, do you want us to send you a letter and ask to meet at the very beginning of next assembly? Do you want us to do it via email? How would it best work for committee during the time between session to actually have the input from committee? I don't know if it's even appropriate to ask that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you, Minister Cochran. So committee is actually going to meet July 8th to the 10th. So would that be an opportunity for you to come back and meet with us? Thank you. Minister Cochran?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Without looking at my calendar, I'm going to take you up on that offer. We will be submitting a letter to you requesting for time within that time period, if that works. And then again, if the committee has other recommendations, we're open to working with you. It's important that we work together on this. We've started from the beginning working together, and my commitment for the rest of the Assembly is we work as close as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Mr. O'Reilly?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The committee has a few hanger honors, like myself as well. We're not members who have some interest, so I would encourage you to find ways to maybe copy all the MLAs, because look, we've all got a stake in this, and I think every MLA probably has some ideas or suggestions that they would be willing to share as we work together. The last question I have for this round, Mr. Chair, is the Academic Advisory Council. I'm very curious to see what the terms of reference is for that. I think one of the most important things we have to do is make sure that this is an independent institution, and that's not what Aurora College was. And that's not how universities work down south. That's not how post-secondary institutions or higher education were ever meant to operate. But I guess I want to know, Yukon College is going through a transformation itself, and I think it would be critically important that we know what those folks are doing and can learn from their experience. So I'm hoping that Yukon College is going to be invited in some way to participate in the advisory council. So is that something that you folks have considered? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Dr. Weegar.
Thank you, MLA Riley. Yes, to your question, Yukon College will be on our advisory committee. I know President Karen Barnes very well. I had breakfast with her the other week when we were at a conference together, and I asked her whether she'd be interested, and she was positively enthusiastic. They are leaders, I think, in post-secondary in the North. They're doing good work. I admire the work they're doing, and we can learn a great deal from the work they're doing. Thank you.
Dr. Weegar. Mr. Natalie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was very interested in terms of the advances and steps that were being taken in terms of the transformation initiatives, and it leads towards the vision of the Polytechnic University, and I remain supportive in terms of ensuring we do it the right way. I was curious and interested in terms of ensuring we had an Aboriginal or Indigenous perspective in terms of forming the whole institution, because the whole experience of education in terms of Indigenous people hasn't been very pleasant. In my own upbringing, I was very fortunate to almost become a product of the institution from primary education, and having the good fortune of student financial assistance that supported me along the way. But in my learning, I came across a person named Rudyard Kipling who espoused the view that every indigenous group in the world had to be civilized, and that became, I guess, the formative position and philosophy of most societies to work with Indigenous people. And through that having that perspective and having that experience of the education initiatives in the North, recently with the residential school experience, that hasn't been very good. And so I think this is an opportunity for rebuilding Aboriginal and Indigenous perspectives and involvement in ensuring that we create the idea of a polytechnic university with some customized and made in the North programs. Recently the working group on to increase the representation of women identified the need for more leadership programs, whether it be administrative programs, management programs, or organizational, political development programs for leaders. We need things of that nature. Even, maybe some programs in terms of empirical analysis of traditional knowledge of First Nations people in terms of confronting the whole issue of climate change in terms of, the ecosystem and the environment and a lot of the values that we associate with the environmental movement, and mixing that and balancing that with a scientific perspective. I think, the North will be a leader on the world stage and, make advances in terms of some of the new cutting-edge programs that we could possibly arrive at. And so I think I'd like to encourage at least the advances in that direction. And more or less a commentary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nedley. Any to Mr. Nedley's comment? Minister Cochran?
Thank you. Usually, I talk too much, but I'd say usually I just take comments, but on this one I'd like to reply on it. I usually talk to all comments. So I hear you, Michael, MLA-Nahendeh, and I agree with you. I think that we have to be very careful what we do going forward. Half of our population is Indigenous. The northern people have been severely impacted by residential school, colonization, etc. We need to be conscious of that. The North also has skills. So, we often talk about the deficits of residential school, but what we don't put up enough is the strengths that Indigenous people bring, the knowledge, the science, the medicines, etc. So I haven't seen the draft of the visioning statement yet, of the compilation of all the surveys. I would be extremely disappointed if I didn't see within that that Indigenous studies or Indigenous knowledge is a key. In fact, it'd be really disappointed because I filled out one of those surveys myself. I'm hoping that other MLAs did as well, stating what their needs were. But we're on that already. As Dr. Weegar said when he first started, his history, he's been very engaged. Community development's one of his strengths. Working with Indigenous communities is another one of his strengths. I take that very seriously. So we're just in the process of looking at hiring a director of Indigenous education as a new position. And the other thing we're looking at doing is bringing in an Indigenous advisory committee that we'll be forming probably this fall. So we do take this seriously. I appreciate the comments, and we need to do this right. Indigenous people, Indigenous knowledge is critical to the North, and we need to honor that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Nedley, anything to follow up? Okay, thank you, Mr. Nedley. Ms. Green?
Thank you. I realize that a lot of your presentation and comments this morning are about process, but I have a content question. So what is the process that the college will be going through to decide what programs to offer, whether to continue all the current programs or to add new ones? How and when is that going to be decided? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Minister Cochran?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what we will be doing is we'll be developing a program review framework that'll be using best practices and national standards. We'll be starting that process by the fall. We should have that? What do you think? What will we have?
Quicker than that.
Oh, quicker than that. Okay, I always give a little bit of time. So by the fall, we will have a framework that is based on national standards and best practices, and at that point then we will be reviewing all programs. My commitment, and Tom Weegar is still following that, is that the social work program and the Bachelor of Education programs would be the first to undergo that framework. And then, of course, when we develop that framework, it would also have the vision in mind as well. What we identify within the North is what our strengths are and where we should be going. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Ms. Green?
Thank you for that answer. So is it possible that we will see more changes in programming, that programs will be scrapped and added after they have been reviewed using the process you outlined? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Minister Cochran?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a little bit presumptuous for me to make that assumption, but if we are looking at using our vision, what people have identified, and having a framework, then there is a possibility that we may be adding or deleting courses. my commitment, as long as I'm the minister, is that we would try to make it, if we were to delete courses, there would be the least disruption for students as possible. We would not just cancel something in the middle of a program, and we try to help those students through. So, but we're not, it's a bit early to even look at that at this point. I think that we need to develop our vision and look at the framework before we even go there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Ms. Green, I'll put you back on the list. Mr. Bolio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my first question is, you're doing a lot of post-secondary framework, strategic planning, and everything. What will be left in Fort Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Bolio. Minister Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, that's a bit of an early question. My commitment all along, and Tom Weegar, Dr. Tom Weegar is in agreement, is that we made a commitment to all 3 campuses, strengthening all 3 campuses and 22 community learning centers. That is our commitment. It's not about making one stronger, taking away, or, that is not on the plate. The plate says 3 strong campus communities, 22 strong community learning centers, and that is my priority. That will be going forward. To determine what programs would be where, again, it's a little bit early in the process. We haven't done that work yet, but I can make this commitment that we are not looking at this time. The next assembly, who knows what will happen, but during this assembly, it's me at the helm as minister, there will not be, we're not taking down any campuses. We want them all strengthened. We believe that there is a need for them. We see the diversity. We heard the voices of students, and when we were out doing our work, and all the students, like I've said many times, students in Fort Smith said, I don't want to go to Yellowknife and I don't want to go to Newvic. Students in Newvic said, I don't want to go to Yellowknife and I don't want to go to Fort Smith. Students in Yellowknife said, I don't want to go to Fort Smith and I don't want to go to Newvic. So what that told us is we need to keep the process that we have and make those stronger. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Mr. Bolio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I guess from that, I'm assuming there'll be 3 strong polytechnic universities, I suppose, or 3 campuses, 1 university. I don't really get a feel for what will be in Smith from that response. But I'll go on to my next question anyway. Is there any room or opportunity or thought to having a nursing school as part of the university campus here in Yellowknife? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bolio. Minister Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, we're early in the process. We need to honor the process, and hearing the comments from the people of the Northwest Territories. But I can say that our nursing program is one of the strongest programs we have. Based on that, it's known as one of our strongest programs. Why would we throw it out? Why wouldn't we use that as one of our strengths? So again, we're early in the process, but it is one of our strongest programs, so it doesn't make sense for me to not build on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Mr. Bolio, I'll put you back on the list.
Sure.
Okay. Mr. McNeely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to see that we're into the transformation stage of doing something based on the recommendations that came out of the foundation. But I'm also mindful in the off-campus communities or region. Some regions don't have campuses, so we can't focus to assume that these 3 campuses are going to address the needs of every region. I represent a region that has learning centers, but I don't know if this message is going from this room or this community or this capital down to that community. And I'm I'm eager to see the framework coming up here in August. I give you an example. We got to take the message, and you can do that during your transition period leading up to this fall. The communities out there in the learning centers have to know what you're doing. What is the overall plan? We see a huge demand because we live in this real social environment. And the social positions that you had mentioned about the nurses. But is it really getting down to the communities? Is skills for success giving a labor market forecast interest to the post-secondary clients or students that maybe this is a good career choice? I use one example of one individual in Fort Good Hope there. He went to the learning center and he wanted to do distant learning to catch up on his credits. No, that wasn't offered there. So he went to the principal. It was offered there. Now he's on him and his family moved out of Fort Good Hope, went to school down south, and they're on apprentice with the Park Corporation. So that's another success. But the gap was missing at the learning center level. I think if you really go to the communities and you really find out in the grassroots what is the lacking gap. I mean, we can talk about this downtown Yellowknife, but do the regional boards really know what we're actually focusing on and going? All stakeholders have to be a part of that engagement. So that's my recommendation, is filling the gaps there. Great plan, moving forward. As my colleague with Kevin had mentioned here, I'm interested in education. I see a lot of gaps in students, just going back to couch surfing. And I think we have to be present. This government has to be present at every graduation to encourage those students. Why talk about post-secondary education and the values to continue if that message is not being delivered to the individual that is graduating from high school? That's how some companies recruit students. We should do the same, and that should be incorporated into the framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McNeely. More of a comment. Minister Cochran to the comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, part of our transformation team that we're hiring for the education ECE is a communications position that would be responsible for not only gathering information but also getting information out there as well. We're revising the roles and stuff for our manager of student services. That would be a position that would also be taken in that. We've met a couple of times. In fairness, I haven't been able to, and I'm guessing Tom hasn't met with all the 22 community learning centers yet in person, because it's only been a few months. But we have met with them. We've had a meeting, teleconference. I know that Tom's had other meetings with them for teleconference. It's important to keep them on. Like I had said earlier, the thing is that we're not using our resources to the best of our ability. 20-some years ago when I went to university in Kamloops, we were using video conferencing and providing satellite programming to Williams Lake at that time. That was 20-some years ago. We're just bringing this in. We just got these in our legislative now. So we're behind a little bit in technology. I see a lot of use in technology. So it's not only about what we're giving them, it's what the future can bring. Within our K-12 programming now, we have in most of the small communities, next year there'll be 25. I think we have 20 small communities right now that have Northern Distance Learning that provides the video conferencing so that they can get the higher grades in their communities. We need to look at expanding that. If we have the technology now in the community to do that, can we expand that for the Aurora College, for the Polytech, to be able to tap into the community learning centers so that, like I said, so not all students want to leave their communities, period. Can we provide the courses online? Those are questions we're still asking. Those are questions that need to be looked at, and we need to we need to provide the services to meet the students' needs versus our needs. So we're very student-focused, and that will be our priority as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Mr. McNeely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll give you another example to put in the framework if you choose to do so. It was brought to my attention here that the demand for higher trades individuals through a training process for the reclamation of this famous discovery in in the oil field in Norman Wells. They're transforming as well, which is going to require a new workforce. They're going from production to reclamation. Okay, now what opportunities are being created by reclamation? The days of the father passing on the shovel to the children, it's now we want to see the children getting a diploma, not inheriting a shovel or a front-end loader to operate. We want higher caliber individuals. So what are we doing to meet that demand? It's similar to the demand identified in the skills for success. So I bring that forward. Maybe that could be incorporated into the framework. And at the end of the day, there will end up with biologists that are going to take advantage of the opportunities of this reclamation. It's amortized and spread over 20 years. That's 20 years of employment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McNeely. More of a comment, Minister Cochrane, to the comment?
I agree with you. I am hoping that you also filled out the survey. I'm hoping that the reclamation of our land is identified. I don't know. I haven't seen it, but Norman Wells is a good example. Giant Mine is a perfect example. So I am hoping that that was identified as well. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Before we go on to the second round, I have a few questions for you, Minister Cochrane. I agree to Mr. Simpson. The 22 learning centers are the fourth campus. People in the 3 centers are looking at that. Well, if you want to make the territories good and great and the education system improved, you need to look at it that way. I am a little bit concerned that you have not gone out to visit at least some of the learning centers and talk to the leadership in those communities. It's great to talk to the 3. You've gone out and done 9 visits. Great, but what about the learning centers, like regional centers, getting out there? Because the surveys are great, but the face-to-face in the meetings. So what is your plan to at least start reaching out to the learning centers? Thank you, Minister Cochrane.
Sure. Dr. Weegar.
Thank you, Mr.
Dr.
Chair.
Weegar. Sorry, Dr. Weegar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. It's very important for us to reach out to the learning centers. I agree with the questions. The learning centers are an essential component of the Polytechnic universities. I, too, am starting to refer to them as the fourth campus. They will start providing the feeders to many of our programs. We may not be able to offer all of our programs in all learning centers, and hopefully we can continue to do the upgrading that students will need. I'm hoping we can start offering some university studies courses, and through the technology start reaching out some of those courses to a number of the learning centers, courses such as an intro to psych, intro to sociology, maybe criminology, various arts courses that students can start to use to build their degree, gain success before moving on to post-secondary at one of the campuses, or even going down south should they choose. So the learning centers are really important, and I do want to get out to a number of the learning centers. I've been to Sigachuk already. That's the only one I've been to. I want to get out to more. I want to get down to Hay River. I want to get up to Tuck. I want to get out to Fort Simpson. So there's a number of communities I really do want to get out to. Whether in my first year I can get out to all learning centers, I'm not sure. I would love to, but I don't know whether my time would allow for that. But I definitely do want to get out to the learning centers and see what the students are doing, what the experiences are in the communities, and how we can better serve them.
Thank you, Dr. Weegar. When I ran, that was one of the things, was utilizing the learning centers. It is a great opportunity. And yes, I did fill out the survey, Minister Cochrane. So one of the things that I'm finding as becoming a politician and getting more involved in community aspects outside of my norm, there's a Denny dictionary out there. We talk about it was oral history. I've actually seen the document. It's like about this thick. And I know the individual, and, there's a lot of information out there that we need to be looking at. So I'm hoping you look at that as well, the social work program and the teachers program. Those are our biggest demands for our north. And because if we have social workers and we have teachers from the north, trained in the north, they're going to stay in the north. Nothing against teachers that come and leave. That's great. They do a good job. I've seen some really good teachers, come and they have to leave, and it's unfortunate. But I'm looking forward to seeing what's happening with this. So it's more of a comment, Minister Cochrane and Dr. Weegar, is that there's lots of information out there. And I think, again, when you go visit the smaller communities, the regional centers, you're going to start hearing this information. They're not going to do the survey. They're not going to. They don't. Some people just don't have time to do it. And we're lucky that we got 743. So I encourage you to get out there and visit. Just more of a comment. At this point in time, we'll go to the second round, and I'll turn to Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with a lot of what has been said here, and there was mention of courses like criminology and psychology, and I went to university, and they're good courses. They open your mind. They teach you how to think. I wouldn't say they're the most functional or rather practical courses that people could take, but I understand that they're functional and practical and that they will lead to a degree. But what we really need is a post-secondary education and an adult education system that's going to get people jobs and educate the people within the territory. And there was talk about strategic planning involving engagement with staff, students, government, communities, IGOs, and other stakeholders. But I'd like to know can you please detail the engagement with industry, as in primarily small business, as well as in like the mines, with education authorities, with local education authorities, and with healthcare system, because I know Mr. Beaulieu was talking about the possibility of having a nursing school here. And I know in Hay River we have students who are in the nursing program at Aurora College but can't get summer jobs. And so there's all of these issues that need to be addressed. So could I hear some details on that type of engagement? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Minister Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, it's important that we work with the labour community. We did the document, the Skills for Success. We identified, the labour market needs that are forecast in the next 20 years. It would be foolish to have wasted that time and not use that. But I will let Dr. Weegar expand on that and talk about how he's going to actually engage with the labour force. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Dr. Weegar.
One of the really important things around polytechnic programming is that it's tied directly to the labor market. It's about training students for jobs. One of the interesting statistics I've often found that, within the college system in Canada is that 20% of our students are coming back to us with degrees. They're coming back to us because they've got a Bachelor of Science in biology, but they don't quite have the skills to get into the forest industry, so they're coming to college to take a forest tech program. Colleges are very strong on the experiential learning and the applied learning piece, and polytechnics will also be very strong. So engaging with industry and the sectors you identified is really critical for us. The health sector is one of the sectors that we've identified that we want to connect with, mainly because our nursing program is so strong. We've got a top-notch nursing program in town. They do research with students. They connect with Indigenous communities. It's a stellar program. So we want to connect with the health sector to make sure that we're doing the kinds of training that they need, especially with a new hospital. We also want to connect with other sectors. I mentioned the Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber of Mines, various industry sectors, because we want to interact with them as we develop new programs. If we're developing a mine reclamation program, for example, we will want to establish a program advisory committee composed of constituents of the mining sector, so that we can sit down with them periodically and ask them, here are the courses we're thinking about developing. They happen to be ported in from Laurentian University that also does a mine reclamation program. What do you think? Are they the right courses? Are students learning the correct learning outcomes? So connecting with industry in a variety of ways is really integral to us. We'll use program advisory committees, in an ongoing kind of way throughout the life of our institution. That means forever, really. And as we get into strat planning, we will engage industry, health sectors, education sectors, Indigenous communities, a variety of stakeholder groups and organizations whose input is really critical to the development of high quality and successful programming.
Thank you, Dr. Weegar. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you. And the minister mentioned skills for success, and I sat in on some of those consultations when the department went out to I was actually at the college in Hay River, and they engaged a bunch of local businesses, and there was a lot of good feedback, and I haven't really seen much come from the skills for success, so hopefully that feedback is integrated into this strategic plan. On a different topic, what I'd like to know about if there's going to be any rebranding efforts for Aurora College, because right now people don't look at Aurora College as the place they would like to go. It's maybe where they can go. And, the president was talking about people with degrees coming back or coming to the college to get an additional, maybe more functional or hands-on diploma. But it's going to be tough to attract those type of people with sort of the reputation that's been built up. So are there plans to either change the name or do some sort of advertising blitz or something related to this revamping of the college? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Minister Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely right. We do need to work in that area. I think and even before the Aurora College Foundational Review came out, there was a perception of the Aurora College being the last choice for students. That was identified in the review, so it was there before. The review didn't help that. The results of the review came out, and it has made an impact on students and people wanting to go there. So I've already given direction to start looking as soon as possible. We're digging in files now to actually look at a student campaign. You'll see that coming out fairly soon. Hopefully within the next few months, that actually identifies people in the Northwest Territories that have, so what I'm looking for, and I'm going to be pretty blunt, is people in the Northwest Territories that have succeeded. So I'm looking for different experiences. So the student that went right out of high school, went into university, either here or down south, and made it. Their story. The student that struggled, maybe dropped out and went back to school, Aurora College, that made it. The student that went to a trades, successful or not, and made it. So we're looking for success stories of students from the Northwest Territories that use our programming that we can actually put out there and do a campaign on that to start to get back that trust from people to say, the whole thing is, I did it, you can do it too. Right, so bringing that trust is important with us, and then as we move forward, the rebranding, we definitely can't call it just Aurora College because it's not, and I'm not going to allow it to be called a Polytech University. So we definitely will need to have, not yet, but we're going to need to find a name for this appropriate name, and so I'm hoping that we'll have that probably in the 19th Assembly. I'm hoping that we'll have as much public engagement in that, and then once we pick that, of course, the rebranding is critical to that whole process. So that is part of our process as we move forward. We're respectful. We know that we have to bring it back, and we need to build that confidence in all of the students, or the potential students. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cochran. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I have a little confession. I didn't fill out the survey, but that was probably because I was on a 2-week straight road trip reviewing legislation, so my apologies, but I got lots of ideas, and you know that. So I think one of the things, I probably knew this before I came into this new job, but we need to invest a lot more into education, period. As a government, we just don't do enough. And that starts with early childhood education, and it's 10-to-1 payoff, right through literacy. We just need to invest a lot more in education as a government. But part of the trick is going to be trying to balance our efforts on post-secondary education against the other needs of the education system. So I'm just interested in hearing a little bit more about how we're going to do that balance and make that balance. And, even with the post-secondary education institution, I hope that we're not going to tie so close to the labor market that we're going to limit our opportunities moving forward. I think we have some tremendous opportunities to help transform our economy into something that's much more stable, much more diversified, that where there may not be immediate labor demand. And I'm talking about things like the conservation economy, remediation economy. We got a giant mine down the road. There's going to be probably close to $1 billion spent in our community in Yellowknife over 20 years. This will be the largest capital project ever undertaken in the Northwest Territories. Unfortunately, it's to fix up a mess. But, you know, my colleague from the Sawtoo, Mr. McNeely, talked about Norman Wells, the same thing. We can export that technology and learning to other places, like Russia. So all of that to say that I think we have some huge opportunities in terms of attracting research and development here while working on transforming our post-secondary education and our economy. And we've got to make this work and try to find the right kind of balance. I'm also a bit worried that, and the minister knows this, the infrastructure demands when we go to Ottawa are not about investment in education or post-secondary education. It's about building roads. We've got to change that messaging. We've got to change that approach and ask the federal government for the kind of investment that they've been promoting, transformative change in post-secondary education. So unfortunately, there may be changes happening in Ottawa that we may not like this fall. So how do we take advantage of this window that might start to be closing and get some commitments out of Ottawa for some investment? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you,
and change our asks when we go to Ottawa. And I know you got to fight with the rest of your cabinet colleagues on this, but I'm right behind you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quite a number of questions in there. I'll try to approach them all if I miss one. How do we invest in education? And you're right, we need to invest more in education. There's no doubt about that. I'm not going to talk about fighting with my colleagues. That's something I'm not putting on this table. How do we balance our education needs? Because we have huge needs not only with our post-secondary, but you're right, with starting from the ground up, early childhood development, right up to. I see them as separate but combined, and we need to keep that focus at all times. That's why I'm glad that Education, Culture, and Employment, my Deputy Minister, Sylvia Hayner, is working closely with Tom Weegar, and in fact, sometimes I even can't figure out who to ask the questions to because we've got them so working together, which is important for this transformation. A good example of that is the need for early childhood educators. We recognize that with our daycares, and so the Aurora College at this point expanded their courses to offer a 2-year program, and then we asked for money for 20 or 30 scholarships versus the 10 we had before. So that's an example of a good partnership, and we need to keep doing that. We need to identify what our needs are within our secondary, our early years, and the college needs to look at that, because what's the use of training people if we don't have the qualifications to even get there? The labor market, I mean, it needs to work with it, but, and you're right, I mean, we can't just look at just what's in the current skills for success or within the labor market who's advocating. We also need to think outside the box. I'm hoping that survey will bring some things. I know that the mining industry, I do know that because they contacted me and said they were getting all their members to write things in, so I'm hoping that when they wrote things in, some of that will trigger like cleanup, right? Because, I mean, one has to go with the others. So if not, I'm sure that Dr. Weegar heard that. One thing, and I'll give an example that wasn't in there, and so we do need to think out of the box. So I know you talked about conservation and remediation, but the other thing that's probably not going to be identified so strongly in the labor market thing is one of the things we have here is our arts and culture. So, you know, people making moccasins, slippers, parkas and stuff. That's an untapped resource. And I always say that, like in Winnipeg, in the South, they are making millions of dollars off of that economy, making fake slippers, you know, that not even have the work. So there's potential in that. Those things can't be left. That's why we did the survey. We're hoping some of those will be identified. I identified the Indigenous cultures within those things, so we do need to think out of the box. As for the asking the federal for infrastructure, again, I'm not going to talk about cabinet stuff, but I will say that we do recognize that we need to get federal support for the infrastructure. We're not there yet. We need to work closely. I made a commitment. We work closely with our community governments and our Aboriginal governments as we move forward with that. We do know that we need residences. Student residences are not okay in Nuvik and Fort Smith. We need to work on that, and we know we need a campus in Yellowknife. A Nuvik campus and Fort Smith campus are fine as they are. They're fairly new buildings, so we don't need a brand new building in those communities at this point. We will eventually, but right now we're bulging at the seams in Yellowknife for a campus, period. But we need to work with the community governments. I'm not going to go forward and do an ask and make a build or design build or whatever without asking them, because that's inappropriate. Students do not only stay on campus, they are in the communities, and so we need to work with them so that our structure is appropriate. Once we've figured out what we need and we hopefully get the land that we want from the city, at that point then we'll be writing a proposal and seeking federal government money. It's a good time. Right now the federal government, well, I don't know, it depends on the election, was talking about doing research on post-secondary in the Northwest Territories. We want in on that conversation right on the ground, but if they're looking at it, it means they're probably going to be hoping to actually providing some funding for that, because currently, right now, the federal government has no say on our education. That's a provincial territorial responsibility, but their interest in the North signifies that they may be providing support, and they have provided support to the Yukon College, so it's time for us. Thank you. I hope I addressed all the questions.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Mr. Riley. You're good?
Yeah.
Ms. Green.
I want to ask a much more general question than my colleagues have been asking. One of the issues that's been raised consistently about Aurora College is that it has attempted to be all things to all people. And the conversation today doesn't lead me to think that it'll be anything different than that going forward. And the problem has been some quality control issues, which no doubt you will have a handle on through the mechanisms you're putting in place. But some of it is resourcing. So what steps are you taking to try to not be all things to all people, to sort of pull into a specific focus for which the college will be known? So this is not exactly analogous, but when I was choosing where to do post-secondary education, I chose on the basis of the specialty of the institution. And so I would like to see the Polytechnic positioned the same way, that people want to come here because the specialty here is, let's say it's Indigenous leadership, that this is a center of excellence for that. So how do we get out of that all things to all people into a more, what could I say, more, not specialized necessarily, but more unique program offering? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Dr. Weegar.
Thank you for the question, MLA Green. You actually kind of stole my thunder and answered the question that I would have given. So I think we're probably on the same track. Centers of specialization are really critical for us. We want to start, and maybe I'll connect with your previous question about how we plan to develop talk about new programs and make that conversation. In the fall, as part of our strat planning, I plan to hold what I've done with my previous faculty at other colleges, workshops that I call new program development workshops, where we sit down for the day or half a day, and we go through a process of identifying our strengths, looking at some opportunities, deciding what kinds of things we want to go after, and really blue skying the programs that we may want to offer, and starting to prioritize which of those we want to move forward on. And then the next step is connecting them to the labor market, and ensuring there's jobs for those programs, and that there are students that may want to take them, that we can fill bums and seats sort of thing. So part of that conversation is sitting down with communities and starting to talk to ourselves and say, what shall be our centers of specialization in Fort Smith and Inuvik and Yellowknife? And what kind of things do we want to focus on more broadly within the territory? Is it climate change? Is it mine reclamation? You know, what shall it be? We don't know what the answer to those questions are quite yet. That will be determined through our strat planning process. But I think it is a very important piece of how we start to define ourselves. And then that gets back to the marketing piece about how we market ourselves as an exceptional institution doing exceptional high-quality programming in these areas of specialization. So that area of specialization conversation is really important for us, I think. We, as much as we can, we'll try to distinguish each of our 3 campuses from one another so that there's no duplication. Inuvik can stand up and say, okay, we're doing this kind of stuff. And through technology, we can reach out with the programming to other campuses on that particular specialty as well. Fort Smith can stand up and say, these are our specialties, and Yellowknife can do the same for its campus.
Thank you, Dr. Weegar. Ms. Green.
No, thank you for that response. Nothing further.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Green. Mr. Bolio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I guess the first thing is the last question I asked about nursing school made it sound like I was not supporting what's going on in a nursing school. What I was more or less thinking about is that it seems like the government doesn't take an opportunity when the opportunity is presented to them. Okay, right now we're moving into a brand new hospital. And we're turning the old Stanton into a long-term care facility with 72 beds. It's an ideal opportunity to have a nursing school. We have a nursing program. That's what we have in the Northwest Territories, and a pretty decent program. In fact, we have surplus of nurses to start with because nurses are doing other things. There's many nurses that are in Yellowknife while we're still bringing locums in from other communities. I think that we should use our own nurses, but that's another matter, right? That's a health and social services matter. But there's a building there already, and if we're unable to take advantage or wish to not take advantage of that building, it's sitting there. There's going to be patients. It's an ideal opportunity to not only have a registered nursing school, but there's all kinds of positions that will eventually could produce all kinds of home care workers all over this city and all over the NWT. I often talk about that. Yesterday, one of the politicians in Quebec, who was a minister with the Pauline Marois government that existed for 2 years in Quebec, is coming back to politics in the federal, running under the Liberals federally, because he thinks there's still a lot of work to be done in home care. I mean, you look at the opportunities and for not only the communities, but for Yellowknife and the regional centers for a program such as that. The returns on that are as big as early childhood development returns. So I just don't understand why we don't take advantage of that. We're planning on building something fairly elaborate. I'm assuming in Yellowknife. When they started off this, I assumed that we're going to have a polytechnic university here in Yellowknife, and we're going to have 2 college campuses, one in Fort Smith and one in Inuvik. But to me, it sounds like we're going to have 3 universities, and I can't see an arts and crafts being a university, a part of a university. you know. So I just, I think I've been away from this. Obviously, I'm not in the inner circle about this stuff, but that's what I'm seeing from the outside. We're going to start to water down the stuff right away. And what we should try to do is we should try to achieve the ultimate, and that's to have an accredited university in Yellowknife. If that's what we're going to do, we should bite the bullet and do that. We shouldn't try to be something to everyone and make sure that we cover everything. I mean, the one thing that Mr. O'Reilly spoke on is the conservation economy. I spoke about the conservation economy many times, and today in the House, I'll be making a member statement on the conservation economy and the huge, huge opportunities there. You know, we're going to be passing legislation today on, hopefully, on protected areas, and we have an opportunity to protect a lot of areas, and we have a huge opportunity to take advantage of the guardianship program, and a huge opportunity to train guardians, rangers, renewable resource officers, and everyone in a place like Fort Smith. And of course, the remediation. And there's billions of dollars in there. Billions. Just in the conservation economy alone, not counting any of the billions of dollars that's set aside for reclamation. And there's billions of dollars just in conservation, just to people to watch the lands, things that are good jobs for people in the communities, and that I'm seeing as not a university degree, but something that goes into a place like Fort Smith. They got a park there. They're right next to a park. There's all kinds of park officers right there. That Fort Smith could make a deal with the federal government and train park officers in Fort Smith. So I just, to me, it seems like we need to refocus our attention back into producing a university in Yellowknife. And, you know, as soon as we could have basically leave Fort Smith as is, or add other programs if we had to take some aspects of it out. But I guess I am disappointed to hear that we're now we're talking fourth campus and things like that, learning centers. Well, they're not going to be universities. They could be feeders. Dr. Weegar said that that could be a feeder. Well, so could Inuvik and Fort Smith. They could be feeders to the university. I think that once we start spreading out the university programs and we lose our focus, I don't think we're going to have a university. We need to have a university that can attract foreign students. We need a university that can attract people from other provinces, and even through there's programs like I know that there's programs where a bunch of Asian students come over here, and there was something went on a while ago with China where they're going to withdraw all their students and so on. Well, there's a lot of foreign students all over, and NWT could be an opportune place for many of the students from other parts of the world, Asia. Many of them come here anyway. A lot of young people come here to view the Borealis, and I just I don't know if I really have a question here, Mr. Chair, but I guess I have to say that that we need to. I would recommend that we focus in on what we're trying to do and not try to, as the idea of a polytechnic university came out, which is a good idea, then we started feeling political pressures from Fort Smith and Inuvik, wherever. I think we should have been able to say, well, things aren't going to change there. But now we're going to try to expand this program. I don't know if that is their idea, but we're going to have a university. I'm assuming the university will be in Smith and in Inuvik as well, and I don't really agree with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. Minister Cochrane to the comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start and then I'll ask Dr. Weegar to expand, if you will. I think I'm going to start with stating that the idea that universities or colleges are campus-based is almost an old idea in some ways. With the use of technology, there's satellite campuses all over Canada reaching small communities. So to just say that Yellowknife has to be the university is a little bit, I'm trying to be respectful, is a little bit kind of old thinking, because we're not even there yet. We're trying to decide, what does that look like? The other thing that's important is that you can't just kind of say one community is going to take all, and I'm going to use Inuvik as an example. We've got people flooding from across the world going to Inuvik to study climate change right now. It's one of the biggest things. Would it make sense? And that's a potential, an untapped potential for us. That's university research grants come. Money comes with research in universities. So if we were to expand our research capacity within a university structure, why would we pull it out of Inuvik when everybody across the world is going there for that piece? So what I'm saying basically is that we need to, every region, every community in the Northwest Territories has different strengths and different things to offer, and we need to value that. We need to look at what they have, and we need to look at what the market's doing. Like I said, if we've got millions of people going into Inuvik, it would be foolish to pull it out of there and say Yellowknife or Fort Smith's going to get it. So we need to look at that. And again, campuses are, it's not only feeders, there's satellites now. Technology is allowing courses to get into small communities with our courses. So they all have university courses. And then I don't know if Dr. Weegar would like to expand through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Dr. Weegar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I could add a few additional comments. Throughout my career, I've worked in a multi-campus institution, campuses throughout a variety of communities. One of the biggest values that those institutions have is that of student accessibility. Campuses are in different communities to provide access to students. And that's a huge value to the work we do. Those students often wouldn't leave their community to go to post-secondary elsewhere. They're tied for a variety of reasons, sometimes with children, sometimes with jobs, sometimes all of the above. So the decentralized approach is not unusual. Polytechnics, too, often have a decentralized approach. Kwantlen Polytechnic University down in Vancouver, which bills itself as the only polytechnic university in Canada, I think some Ontario colleges would take exception to that. But KPU has a number of campuses throughout Vancouver, throughout a large area, Richmond and Langley, and they serve various students. And again, it's about accessibility. So I would say definitively that no to 3 universities. We're not going down the journey of establishing 3 universities distinct from one another in 3 different communities. We want to have one polytechnic institution that has a branding and a value for the entire territory, whatever we name it, that has a similar student experience when the student walks through the door in terms of how we embrace them and bring them in and register them for courses and programs. Similar experience in Inuvik, in Fort Smith, and in Yellowknife, and all of our learning centers. We got some work to do around that right now. So it is about accessibility, and it is about reaching out to students and making our programming available to them, and that's why the decentralized model. I'll talk a couple seconds about the distinction between polytechnics and universities. Universities, of course, tend to focus on 4-year degrees, a bachelor's degrees, a BA in various disciplines, or a Bachelor of Science, with some exceptions. There are post-degree programs of 2 years, and there's a 3-year law program. There are a couple exceptions, but generally 4-year degrees. Polytechnics do 4-year degrees, but they also do 2-year diplomas, they do 1-year certificates, and the important piece, I always believe, is polytechnics also handle the upgrading piece, which colleges are very strong on. And we know in many of our communities that upgrading piece is important. Students leave school for a variety of reasons, to get work often, or to have a child, and they come back to us at 28 and they suddenly know why they want to learn math and English, and they come at us with a sense of vim and vigor, and away they go. That upgrading piece is important, and then we help those students aspire to their career aspirations. So polytechnics handle that gamut of programming. Universities do not. And that's an important distinction. And one of the reasons I believe why the territory has chosen to go down the route of a polytechnic university, which allows that diversity of programming. International, absolutely. there's a huge potential here for international. I see it over and over again. When I arrived in March and saw the Asian tourists coming up here, the Chinese and Japanese tourists, I thought, wow, we developed some good programs. We will attract Asian students en masse. And that's a huge benefit to our students as well. Mr. Chair.
Dr. Weegar. Mr. Bolio.
I'll try to be very quick here. I'm not advocating to pull the research center out of Inuvik, and I didn't say that. What I said was leave what's there, and that would include the university. Earlier, one of the MLAs here indicated that maybe Aurora College is somewhere you go because you can go there, and it's a program that would fit sometimes some of the mature students that have the background of having grade 12 in small communities in the end of ET. As we all know what that means, I think. And so the idea of having a college-like structure in Fort Smith and Inuvik and a research center in Inuvik is something I think will work. I'm talking about offering university-level programs in all three, and if it's diploma, certificates, and all of that, that would be something that we may have a different. I don't know if we're going to have a different name for the campuses, and that's going to be. Remain in those communities, but to feed the university here. From listening, it kind of sounded like you guys we're going to have one university. I knew that, but not three separate universities, but one university that was located in three places. I'm not sure if that would work. That's what I was indicating. But that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. William. To the comment? Just a comment? Okay, thank you. I just have a couple of comments, and then I realize in the time, being respectful of that.
I know.
This is more important.
I'm just wondering what's on my agenda. I might have to fight for.
Yeah. So, in regards to the philosophy in that, have you guys reached out to the department to look at this great thing called distant learning? You guys taught it, here's this great thing there, and I've seen the benefit of distant learning for some of the communities I represent that are able to tap into it. So have you guys, the college and Dr. Weegar and the department, looked at those, taking that success and trying to encompass this into what we're trying to do? Because, we talk about satellite campuses. I've seen satellite campuses work all across Canada, and this is an opportunity, but this, to me, would be distant learning opportunity. And, yeah, I'll just leave that question. Minister Cochran?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. That's why I'm glad that both deputy ministers are here, and like I had said earlier, sometimes I get confused on who we're asking questions for. In fact, I'm not even sure. My guess is that Dr. Weegar is probably sitting here wondering why we're even talking about this, because this technology has been in the South for decades. We're new to it in the Northwest Territories. So we're talking like it's a new thing, but my guess is he's probably sitting here saying, why is this even a discussion? So it is an untapped resource. We need to use it. And I think, like I said, that, if we're offering a course in Yellowknife, unless it's hands-on like a practicum in nursing, you might have to be here to actually learn the labs. But if it's something that's not a social work degree, why wouldn't we use distance learning so that you can offer it in one campus, whatever it may be, whatever community, and then students all over the Northwest Territories can get it, not only from our other campuses, but also from our community learning centers. We're looking at that. So, like I said, it's old technology for the South. They do it all the time. It's new technology for us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. And just one final comment. There's some really good success stories out there. The one thing I find really troubling is we do something really good and then we stop it. And I would like you to look at the Community Recreation Leaders Program and look at that program and see how successful that was. Because I looked at it, compared to any program that was down south, and it was a 2-year diploma program that was better than anything I've seen down south. So it would be something that I would encourage you guys to look at, some of those success stories there. So just more of a comment in that. So, Minister Cochrane, do you have any final comments before we adjourn the meeting?
I really want to thank committee for meeting with us today. Like I had said at the beginning, I feel that we worked well as committee and cabinet on this issue, and I'm hoping that for the rest of this assembly we'll continue that, and I really am hopeful that the next assembly will carry on our work and realize that this isn't about cabinet telling their direction. It's about working together for all of the needs of the students of the Northwest Territories. Has to stay forefront for all of us as politicians as we move forward. The goal is to get it away from the government because of politics interfering, and so I'm hoping that members that are elected in the next assembly will remember that and carry that forward. The goal is to make them eventually independent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane, and I'd like to thank you very much for the work that you've been doing to work with us on this area here, and I greatly appreciate it. To me, that's what consensus government is about, working together for the people of the Northwest Territory. So again, thank you very much. I thank Dr. Weegar and the rest of your staff for being here today. I know it was an early morning and we've gone a little past our time, but thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you. I'm going to go fight for cabinet for you. I got on my agenda.
I'll just tell you.